Maybe I'll start by asking you something, Delaine, and namely, I was struck also trying to see a general optics in our very diverse talks that we've heard here and very different things that we've been talking about. I was immediately struck by this thing that you did, this installation you made and these performances you made in front of the Parliament building in Vienna. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you see the reinvention of the camp, as you said in your talk, and what seems to be happening at least on a kind of mimetic level with Occupy. Because Occupy could be considered this kind of reinvention. A reinvention perhaps maybe not of a Roma camp or Sinti camp, but maybe also a refugee camp, a camp of survivors that's being inserted, which is populated obviously not by refugees, not by survivors, but people who are living in an affluent society, who are not excluded, but who are self-excluding almost themselves, inserting themselves as an image. How do you see that as a not quite artistic practice, and how do you see your own work in regard to that? I was just curious.
Well, I think it's a mixture of actually what's happening in reality and how, as an artist, I'm working with those realities when I'm given the opportunity to maybe put them in spaces where if someone wanted to set up an Occupy camp outside the Parliament building in Vienna, they wouldn't allow them to do it. Like in England, for example, you can't get anywhere near the Parliament building at all. So, the fact of being given the opportunity to work in that space, we just decided that we would push it as far as we could. And it wasn't popular because obviously the government, the President of the Parliament, Barbara Prammer, was very pro what we were doing, but most of the other people there weren't, and we had numerous conversations with security when we first arrived there that were quite threatening really in a way because of what we were thinking of doing there. But I think that it's this idea of you take the opportunities when they're given to you, and these things are happening all over the place, but actually if you're given the opportunity to put them somewhere where in reality that wouldn't be able to happen, then you have to take that chance and also confront people with it, because obviously where it was, there were lots of people coming and going all the time. It became a meeting place for people, so anyone could come into the space and meet if they wanted to. So lots of different people turned up that were doing things elsewhere in the city connected with things like Occupy or whatever, but found that they could come outside of a particular building and do it. So
did you, I mean, how did this actually work? I was very curious also. How did this meeting place establish itself, and what was the role actually of other people, and the kind of, you were saying that you were very much stressing, I'm not alone. And I think this is a very interesting moment that also resonated in your talk, this idea of a kind of physical presence and necessity, needing to be having a kind of physical togetherness. Is this also, I mean, you were talking about how it becomes a meeting place. Is this also an aspect that really...
It's something that both, because I did the project obviously with my husband, but we worked with, we've worked quite a lot in Austria previously, but in Graz. And so we have lots of connections there, and we've worked with lots of different Roma organisations, but we've also introduced everyone to everybody else. So for example, in Graz, we went to the local hostel where all the Roma stayed, but we took the people, all the different people that we were working with there, and then the guys got involved in the whole project as well when we were working in Graz. So when we had this opportunity to do this in Vienna, we involved everyone that we worked with previously. So everyone was invited to come and be able to do a talk or a presentation or whatever they wanted. They could invite whoever they wanted to the space as well. We produced a film program where different people were involved in presenting films as well. So it was about inviting as many other people who wanted to be involved. The opportunity was there for them to use the space because it was too good an opportunity not to engage with other people and for them to be able to have that as well.
I mean, I can add to this that I had the fantastic opportunity to go to Tahrir Square several times after the 18 days, so on many occasions of mobilization. And one of the things that strikes you is that it's a huge square. It was designed in the last years of the Mubarak regime to be very difficult to access, but once you block traffic, car traffic, then it's fine. So there is a core of the space where people sit and stand, and then there's an outer ring of movement, and then there's another ring of audience, and then another ring of stages. Okay, you realize that you can spend 10 hours there just walking around, but really walking slowly. But a lot of people just go there to look at each other, to spend time with each other without really necessarily engaging. I mean, you have conversations with strangers, but they are not really the point. The point is that this civil society, or this society, social fabric that was completely ripped apart with fear, with distrust, with inequity, suddenly is making its way it's stitching its way back, but by itself. This observing the other, and it's not like a nasty gaze, it's really just discovering, lending your body to be discovered and discovered. It's really an unbelievable experience. I don't know how else to describe it. The other thing about the physicality is when, I don't remember which protest it was, but they wanted to commemorate the martyrs because the families of the martyrs were being victimized. That's also in Egypt. And groups came from various avenues into Tahrir. And a lot of them, with Photoshop, created masks that were the exact faces of the martyrs and just covered their face with them. So they're inhabiting another identity. This is an interesting take on individualism. It's true that the Arab Spring was not the result of political parties, the conventional way we have thought about politics. There's no charismatic leader. It is a very individual, you make a choice to go there as an individual, but suddenly you realize that you are one in a collectivity, and it's a collectivity that you are forming in the moment. It's fantastic, especially that you are able to inhabit the identity of somebody, the body of somebody else, to recognize their injustice.
We have a question.
Thanks. It's a question for Rasha. My name's Sophie Barraby. Maybe it's a stupid question, but I was quite interested when you were showing the posters. You were showing the posters not pasted on walls, but just as images. And in relation to the body, to the body being the support for the messages, for the body of the revolution, I was wondering if the poster wasn't, in a sense, quite an obsolete form, because posters used to be on walls when there wasn't the internet and people could put them on walls, then they would be ripped off but people would see them. Whereas I imagine a lot of these posters aren't actually ever posted on walls and aren't seen. At least you didn't show any photos of posters on walls. They were very dematerialized, and I was wondering if there was something of a shift between the kind of obsolete form of the poster in old revolutions and the kind of the new form of the body. Something like that. Maybe it's silly, but...
No, it's not silly at all. It's, well, I got the posters from the Facebook page of the group that produced them. So, and maybe it's definitely my fault. I should have looked for images of the posters on the wall. But I thought this would, was cleaner and clearer. Actually, it's part of the struggle to make a poster, to paste it on a wall. It's a reclaiming of the physical wall of the street. So there was, these posters are made to be pasted on walls, and they are pasted on walls. And I mean, I have seen images of posters ripped and then another one put on top of it, etc. It's, that exists. So I don't think it's obsolete. I don't think they regard it as an obsolete form. It's a very important tool to claim the city, to claim the space, the physical space. But I just didn't show you those images.
Hello, my name is Eva Steinem from the Master in Fine Arts from HKU. First of all, I want to congratulate you, Rasha, because it was a very touching conference. And I think there's a very strong difference or contrast between what we heard in the morning and what we're hearing now, because I feel the first part of this was to show the concerns we have around how art is working in our environment, on the Western environment, and how it is threatened by how it has internalized this neoliberal system. But then, how do you relate to this when you are studying a case in which art is not threatened itself, it's life and freedom that is being threatened, and art is just a tool for fighting, for defending those rights through very traditional means. I don't think there's any interest in these kind of artistic manifestations of questioning art itself. It's just used as something else. I mean, with all the strength that art has, but what do you think of this?
I don't know when the insurgency is over, whether these posters will sell at Sotheby's for hundreds and thousands of dollars. And they might. Or go to Documenta and be, you know, whatever. I don't care. What I care about is what happened in the moment. That people forged something new and they found a home in art. They didn't find a home in something else. I mean, and they found a home in art, and I think this is what's important. Whether they will end up as artists themselves, I don't know. But if we are asking where is the place of art, I think it's the problem. Maybe the complication is that both politics and art deal with the imaginary and the ability to imagine. And it's okay if art becomes the alternative territory until the other is there. Or it's important that they should be together all the time. When I was trained as an artist, but I decided that I had no talent, and I was very right in never pursuing a career as an artist. So I have worked in the arts, and I came back to Lebanon when the civil war was over, and on the NGO criteria, to have me in a meeting, you win a lot of points. I'm a woman, I'm half Muslim, half Christian, I'm part Syrian, part Palestinian, it was fantastic to have me on a panel or in a meeting, etc. And I joined a lot, I was invited to, the reconstruction of the left, rethinking the Communist Party, all of this. And in none of those places, I found the possibility to reimagine the world, or to change the world. And as a curator, sometimes I do, and among artists, sometimes I do. So that's also the place of art today.
Hi, Simon Sheikh. Actually, this was a question for Delaine, but I'm trying to see if I can phrase it so it's for both of you. Even though I think there's some ethical violence involved in that, because that means that I am comparing struggles, which I don't feel authorized to do. But I will anyway try to see if you can both address the question in a more broad manner. And it's because Delaine, you said something that interested me about learning from mistakes, historical mistakes. Yeah. In order to imagine a future. And I was thinking of that in terms of an identity that is not bound to a nation state, because it seems to me when we're sitting here and looking at this sign saying former West, that's something that the nation states of the former or present West is very bad at doing. at learning from its mistakes. So I'm wondering if that's a possibility or a privilege that has to do with a political struggle that is not confined to a national space. So I was wondering about your thoughts on that. The other part was, the second part where the comparison, or not really comparison, but where it could also be a more general question was, when you mentioned one of these slogans saying we are the traitors and you have to free yourself from yourself, so to say, which means also freeing yourself from the history and from the, and let's say from the national identity of Syria. So I was wondering if there was what the connection there would be to the national space of struggle. And then I was wondering if you could see that in terms of the discussion of fascism that had been going on in the morning, where one thing that I thought about there was, of course, this famous phrase from Foucault of having a guide to a non-fascist life, which means that you try to free yourself, not just from the political pressure of fascism, but for those, let's say, psychological mechanisms of fascism that become installed in you as a modern subject. So that would be the sort of hazy way of trying to make a more broad question.
Okay, well, obviously the community I come from is a global community. It's not also restricted to the European states, and I think that is also something that generally gets forgotten about. You know, we have a massive community in Australia and in America as well, for lots of the reasons that I talked about, like transportation and slavery, as well as migration, naturally. So to me, it's like, yeah, I'm British, but I'm many other things as well, because obviously wherever I travel within Europe and I meet up with even other like-minded individuals, let alone people from my community, I just don't feel like I'm confined by the borders of a country. And I think I am not alone in this, and I don't think my community is alone in it. I think lots of people feel like this as well. Recently I've been in Slovakia dealing with Roma who've been deported, that's the only way I can say it, from Germany. But they see themselves as being Roma, but they see themselves as being German as well. And I think lots of people have these, it's like multiple identities almost. And I think if more people could think about themselves in that way, rather than in sort of nationalistic terms, then that could open up a lot of possibilities, I think, really, just, in the world, not just in one place or here or whatever. And so I think that there's something to be learned from this in a much bigger way, that if we could see. I mean, my husband, I don't know if anyone knows my husband's work, he deals a lot with maps, and he literally draws faces and figures all over them, so there's no borders and there's no boundaries on them, because even if we look to Europe, a lot of the borders that we've got now weren't there, say, 100 years ago. They've changed, and they're constantly changing and moving. But that's a man-made thing. Naturally, we're not confined by this. And originally, we were all nomadic. So if we go back to what Dave was talking about, which is, the whole idea of like refugees and people moving, and we end up in camps or whatever it is, it's like that is a natural state to be in that way, not to be confined as well. So I hope that in some way answers it.
I think the insurgency addresses, I showed the posters to just give a sense of how this new subjectivity is being articulated, and specifically that there are no big intellectuals behind it, there's no theorizing behind it, a lot of it is really spontaneous, one of the most beautiful things that I couldn't show you is the reversal of patriarchy. This is an insurgency where you have 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds going into the street. The organizing committees, the average age is like 25. And it has been acknowledged in the press, texts by op-ed pieces, where actually senior people, who are fathers, it happened a few times that it's become a recurrent motif now, to testify to how wonderful it is to be led by your son, how wonderful it is to be taught by your son, to be taught wisdom by your son. It's new, this breaking of patriarchy, where it means you don't have to kill your father. But the awareness of the gender discrimination, awareness of this reaching out to the Kurds. I mean, and the Kurds have been profoundly involved in a lot of Kurds. In the insurgency. This is all part of breaking the siege of fear. The Assad regime says, if we go, there will be civil war. Of course, that's what the New York Times is saying now, or the smartest French critics, right, analysts. There will not be civil war. If we go, the communities will eat each other apart. That will not happen. And that is what the insurgency is saying, because when you look at the cross-section of a street of these people dancing, it's Muslims and Christians, it's men and women. In Aleppo, one of the most conservative cities, men and women shoulder to shoulder, body against body.
I would like to add, just trigger to what Delaine said, and in response to your question, Simon, regarding a Roma community. I've been involved with quite a large research project, one could say, about the notion of Roma art currently. And there's indeed a development in the contemporary art field that goes under the name Roma art. And it's something, with all due respect, I heavily oppose intellectually, and rather connect that other movement within the Roma community, which is remarkably fascinating. Now, I think the Roma art is that movement within the community of artists, Roma artists and Roma intellectuals who say, let us in, let us be part of your system. So what we discussed in the morning, that idea of endless inclusion, and of course there is an emancipatory moment to it, and it's probably very important. But there is another stream of thought that's going on currently, which is actually saying, we have an opportunity to look at something that one could call the Roma knowledge. That is potentially dangerous term, because once you label anything Roma, you are in the identity politics and all those kind of discussions on essentialism. But you can actually look at certain sort of distant knowledges, such as knowledges that are accumulated across the global community of Roma, which is remarkable when you think about that. There is no any connection to one nation state. The idea of makeshift culture. There is no militia. There is a very particular way of relation to economy, which is actually how the community can exist by itself within its own terrain, without romanticizing. Because I need to say that in countries like Hungary, there's a genocide going on. Something that we do not really experience here in the Netherlands, but we know about the situation in France and Italy, where Roma European Union citizens are being evicted into their country of origin. But when we look at certain possibility that something like, call it Roma model or distant knowledge that's carried throughout Roma community, what is it that we can learn from it at this particular moment? And this whole research, so it's turning tables. It's not including Roma art into our system, but in a way learning from this kind of particular model of existence and trying to incorporate our way of existence into it, perhaps, although that's slightly simplistic. But how this was unleashed, this research, came from a Roma artist totally flabbergasted photographing Occupy camps. Saying, for centuries we've been doing this, and suddenly you know, the camp is being reclaimed, and it's not a claim of minority, oppressed minority in Europe. It's a claim of symbolically or realistically 99%. And that's, you know, there is a possibility to not to go and knock on the doors of existing Western type institutions that you talk about institutional racism, with the request, let us in, but try to envision another sort of movement and another sort of kind of, again, absent knowledge thus far in official discourses that could help us envision the possibility otherwise.
Are there any more questions? Okay, one more, and then I think we should take a small break and go to the next.
All right. Does this work? Hi, my name is Dima Hamadi. I have a question. I just hope it's not really complicated because it's a couple of ideas. I was really interested, my question is for Rasha. I was interested with the talk about the body. I was hoping that you could elaborate more on that, but for now I was, since you already mentioned that at many different instances that you weren't really sure whether, or you could call these as works of political activism or art, does that allow us to ask a question of how these works in the Syrian insurgency or the Arab Spring would actually change our criteria for what's aesthetic in those works? I mean, I'm interested in one film from the Syrian YouTube films, and it's about a man who actually films himself dying, and it's his body. I really still cannot make any, figure out what it is in particular, but can we call this work of art? Or is there like no borders between this political and artistic? And I hope this is clear, right? Okay, thanks.
No, I mean, I don't think I can answer your question. It is clear, your question is clear, but I don't think I can answer your question. And because I work, because I live in Beirut and I work in the region, and because I follow the artistic production in the region. I have a game I play with a local critic, a friend, a very good, close friend, every 6 months we meet in a cafe and we discuss what is contemporary. We try to redefine what is contemporary. In my presentation I showed you charcoal drawings by a painter. So he did a lot of jail, and then he left for Paris. He escaped to Paris, where he lived for 25 years. And then he came back. 2005, he was given the permission to come back. And he did this exhibition of charcoal drawings of the head of a sheep, a dead fish, really just extremely figurative and a bit mystifying. The exhibition it was organized by a gallery, but it took place in the middle of the souk, in a khan, in a courtyard, that basically is open to the public. I think 2,500 people attended the opening. So it's a big courtyard, it could fit, but I think 500 were military police. And they came because they knew that the guy was a dissident. And they knew that he was showing images. Seeing them in the exhibition was hilarious because they didn't understand what the hell was so threatening about these images, like showing the head of a cut-off sheep. At the same time, the people who came to his exhibition were either people who had done jail time with him and who had not seen him for 25 years, or the artsy-fartsy. The artsy-fartsy, because there was police, they couldn't buy the drawings. They wanted to. It's all about this new bourgeoisie, the new villas. I want a Yusuf Abdelki in my salon. But there was a cop watching who was buying and who was not buying. Nobody dared to buy anything. The former political insurgents, and you can tell them just from the physical, they invariably have a broken limb or an eye that doesn't work. And they were just so happy to be there. And every time they saw an image, they would either explode in laughter or applaud. They saw something in these images. And so I go back to my friend and I tell her, is this contemporary, is it not? Can a figurative charcoal drawing be, exhibited in these circumstances? How subversive is it? How unsubversive? Yeah, the drawings ended up in Dubai, sold by Sotheby's. That's why I don't know how to answer your question. At the same time, the fountain intervention. And there was another intervention, ping pong balls. The Damascus, on top of at the edge of Damascus is a dry mountain, a hill, very high hill called Qasyun. And on that dry hill is where Hafiz al-Assad built a palace, but also around him where the military generals built their villas. So some guys buy thousands of ping pong balls and they write some of the slogans of the revolution on them and they go on top of the hill and they release the ping pong balls. Now, I don't know if you've ever imagined the sound of thousands of ping pong balls just jumping on the rocks. It's a deafening sound, it's a frightening sound. A ping pong ball is the most inoffensive, sweet thing you can think of course. But these things are documented. I don't know how we will write them in the history of artistic practice or in the history of political actions. I don't know, in between. But also, what do we do with the stuff that Bashar al-Assad commissioned? Do we write it out? He produced images.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for this extremely interesting session. And we will now take a short 15-minute, 20-minute coffee break and then continue with the next speaker. Thank you.